Hello, shameless writers. I'm Kristen McTiernan, the nonsense-free editor, here for your twice-monthly dose of writing wisdom. So many of you were kind enough to comment on my last video regarding what kind of videos from me you'd like to see, and no surprise, many of you wanted the nitty-gritty of memoirs. So today, we're going to talk about a frequent question that I get from memoirists, specifically, how not to get sued. Before we get started, I wanted to specify that this is for writers in the US, as libel laws in other countries can be a lot more onerous. There are three big areas of law writers should be careful of when writing memoirs and autobiographies, regardless of the country they live in, though. They are defamation, invasion of privacy, and fraud. These are the main three grounds upon which someone you featured in your memoir could sue you over. So, what do these mean? Defamation is the most common grounds that you might be sued for, and it covers two parts, libel and slander. And you've probably already heard of these just from watching the news. Libel is publishing a false statement that injures somebody's reputation. Slander is verbal, such as giving an interview and saying something untrue about a person. You might remember that Jesse the Body Ventura sued the estate of Chris Kyle, aka the American Sniper, for both libel and slander. The reason for this was because in his book, Kyle had told a story of fighting an unnamed famous person in a bar and that he just beat him up. In a later interview, I think it was for a radio, he admitted it was Jesse Ventura. Problem. The event in question never happened. It was just a funny story he told. But Ventura didn't think it was funny, and he was so incensed that he sued Kyle's estate. And I say estate because Kyle had already passed away, meaning Ventura's lawsuit was taking money from Kyle's widow and his children. Telling a falsehood in your book has serious consequences that just might outlive you. It's important to say that the defamed person must be living, so you can't be sued for defaming a dead person. And you don't necessarily need to have identified them by their name in their book in order to be sued. You only need to have enough information that a reasonable person could identify who you're talking to, a person or a business, based on the details that you provide in your book. So if you do that, you might be open to a libel suit. The best way to protect yourself from these suits is to be able to prove you're telling the truth. Defamation only applies to lies, so if you can prove that it's true, they can't sue you for it. Opinions are also protected, but they can still be problematic if you don't present enough backup facts for your opinion. So for instance, if you call your pastor a heroin addict in your book, you're less likely to be sued if you mention that there's money going missing, that your pastor has erratic behavior, and maybe finding unexplained needles. Your opinion has to have merit if it is to be protected. You can't just say, oh, I think he's a heroin addict, but then you don't add any backup for it. Parody is also protected, and thank heavens for that. Or the marvelous Based on a True Story by Norm Macdonald would never have existed. I've talked about that book before. I had to pull over. I was laughing so hard at the audiobook. 10 out of 10 recommend. The next way to get sued is invasion of privacy. And this one is important because private people have the right to be left alone. So unless you're famous or you know famous people, the people you write about are going to be private people, meaning that their secrets and their flaws are generally not for public consumption unless they give you permission. Even if it's true, or especially if it's true, honestly, then if you're revealing facts that are not in the public interest, there's a basis for an invasion of privacy claim. Usually, invasion of privacy occurs when private facts that are not in the public interest are disclosed. So you've basically intruded into a person's private life. It means that someone is portrayed or even misrepresented in a false light, usually in a highly offensive way to that person. The person in question must also be alive, which is why some of the best memoirs are written after the offending person has died. The reason for this is that invasion of privacy must involve damage to a person's reputation. Being simply embarrassed by these facts is not enough to sue somebody. The person must also have reasonably thought that these facts would remain private. So if they have already disclosed the event in public somehow, they have no claim. In the past, writers have been permitted by the courts to tell their own story for the benefit of the public. And if your own story happens to embarrass somebody else, you will not be found liable. It's only when you tell someone else's story that it becomes kind of murky. For instance, if you write about being abused by your mother, this is acceptable. But if you include material detailing your mother's terrible childhood based on stories that she told you privately, you might have a problem. Then there's consumer fraud and breach of warranty. Fake memoirs and fraudulent autobiographies happen. I'm sorry to say this, but they do. Just Google James Frey if you're too younger to remember him. That's Frey. A writer who lies about stories or events that are later discovered to be false runs a really high risk of being sued, usually in a class action lawsuit by readers claiming to have been deceived and possibly the publisher for breach of warranty in the publishing agreement, as well as, being publicly canceled. So enjoy that. While most cases of fraud due to authors falsifying accounts of their own lives are settled and withdrawn for everybody's sake, that's a hassle nobody needs. I mean, most memoirs and autobiographies have numerous falsehoods and inaccuracies, but it's not intentional. Memory can be a sketchy thing, which is why I tell you to talk to other people before you write it down. But that's different than willfully lying about one's life experience, and it has serious legal consequences. Don't lie in your book, for heaven's sakes. So, other than not lying, how do you avoid being sued? The first step is list the people who are living or dead, who are famous, maybe public people or private people, and examine how your book is going to characterize these people. If you're going to be characterizing them in a negative fashion or in a way that you suspect they wouldn't like, put a star next to their name. If the person is dead, go ahead and share all the secrets you want. Just don't defame the dead person. Make sure it's all true. Sally Field was famously relieved when Burt Reynolds died before the publication of her memoir. That way she didn't have to worry about any defamation. Another way to get out of being sued is consider fictionalizing the true story. Definitely speak to a lawyer regarding who might need to sign a release before publication, by the way. Fictionalize people that you don't think will sign a release or you just plain don't want contact with. In order to fictionalize them properly, you have to obscure any recognizable detail that a reasonable person could use to figure out who they are. And of course, always tell the truth. If your memory is compromised because you were a child, or due to trauma, or due to being in some kind of an altered state, try to interview people who have a better grasp on the events in question if there were other people there. Don't disclose people's private secrets. We all have the right to tell our own story in our own way. Don't be the person who tells someone else's secret to make yourself seem more interesting. This is just vile. Even if you're on solid legal ground, we Americans, Westerners, are a litigious people, and you might still get sued. So keep records of your research, record interviews, document your fact findings. Keep copies for proof that you have not made any negligently false statements. Tape recordings are honestly the best for interviewing, or if you're doing a Zoom meeting, record that. If you can't do that, I guess notes. Those can still be presented in court, but audio and video recording is still the best. Definitely use common sense. As tempting as it might be, don't use your memoir as revenge. I actually get several of those a year. You are asking for legal trouble. And in one instance, one of the jobs that I got for first editing, we got subpoenaed because this person said some potentially libelous things, or at least that was what was said in the subpoena. So yeah, good times. And finally, if you're really concerned about it, media liability insurance exists, and it may be worth the investment depending on the subject of your memoir, particularly if it's, a public person you think might sue you. So those are my tips on avoiding a lawsuit for memoirists. If you want to discuss it more or get feedback from other memoirists, you can come on over to the Nonsense-Free Novelists and experience what I like to call social media for grown-ups. It's like Facebook, except without nonsense, because that's kind of my thing. We'd love to have you. So that's all I have for this week. Until next time, take care and write well.